E-hailing has revolutionized transport, making it easier than ever to move around with just the tap of a button on your mobile phone. But in South Africa, this convenience hasn't come without its consequences. From violent clashes with the powerful minibus taxi industry to exploitation, crime, and unregulated platforms, the rise of Uber and Bolt has reshaped our transportation sector in South Africa forever. So then, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about the e-hailing industry in South Africa, examine the dangers and conflicts faced by drivers in this sector on a daily basis, and try to find out whether or not the system can be fixed. But wait, if you're looking for a job or you're looking to hire people for your business, here's a quick message for you. Julukaworx is an online platform designed to connect skilled artisans with employers who actually genuinely need their expertise, while also giving contractors the opportunity to hire people who have been properly vetted and proven to be valuable employees. If you're a job seeker, you can go on to julukaworx.co.za, create a profile showcasing all of your skills, competencies, and qualifications, and then you can either search for jobs that have been posted by employers or wait for employers who are actively looking to hire to contact you. For employers, signing up to Julukaworx allows you to hire any type of skilled worker that you're looking for, whether it's for your business or your home, if you're looking for domestic workers and such, ensuring that you have access to competent and reliable individuals. So whether you're looking for a job or you're looking for your next employees for your contracting business, please go check out julukaworx.co.za and support the people who support the channel, because who knows, that support that you give them might also give you an opportunity. Thank you very much to Julukaworx for sponsoring the channel, and back to the video. In 2008, Canadian software engineer Garrett Camp has just sold his first startup company called StumbleUpon for $75 million. $75 million. I wonder how much that is in rands. In rands, that is an amount of money neither you or me will ever see in both our lifetimes combined. So let's just move on. This money would come in very handy for him, as he had just been blacklisted from both taxi companies that he had been using to get around the San Francisco Bay Area. This blacklisting kind of caused him to question the entire taxi industry, which would lead to him using 35 of that $75 million to reserve a website called www.ubercab.com. Starting out as a luxurious kind of limo-esque service that only certified and licensed professional drivers with black luxurious cars could sign up for. In October of that year, UberCab would change its name to Uber after some tension with the San Francisco taxi industry. That kind of tension kind of becomes a reoccurring theme here, as you'll see when we continue discussing the story of Uber. From its inception in 2010 to 2011, the company would first start by expanding domestically in New York, and then would go internationally, expanding into Paris, France. And in 2012, the general public would get access to app-based e-hailing with the launch of UberX, which was a less expensive alternative to the kind of pseudo-limo black car service. UberX would feature more normal cars like the Toyota Prius and would mark the beginning of Uber's international domination. A year later, in 2013, Uber would launch in India and Africa, now being valued at around $3.6 billion. I'm not even gonna Google how much that is in rands. $3.6 billion says enough on its own, chief. I already saw how much that 70-something million was. I don't wanna feel sad because of this video. So we're gonna move on. And from that point on, the company has kind of just never looked back, now being valued at around $190 billion and being available in over 70 countries. Along the journey of Uber, Garrett Camp, the original main guy, would bring in Travis Kalanick, kind of like your brash, cutthroat entrepreneur with a taste for disruption, as a co-founder and the CEO of Uber. Under his leadership, Uber adopted its infamous ask for forgiveness, not permission motto that would kind of go on to define its global expansion. Like I always say, there is nuance to everything, my friends, and this massive growth, just this massive explosion in growth of not only Uber but the e-hailing industry as a whole wasn't without its consequences. You see, Uber and Travis Kalanick have a bit of a history, a bit of a reputation for playing fast and loose with the rules and regulations when they want to expand into a new market. See, regular taxis have always just been heavily regulated internationally, with drivers having to have special licenses, vehicles having to undergo heavy inspection and insurance standards, and taxi fares being something that is set by the government as a whole or other such kinds of bureaucratic regulatory bodies. And because Uber classifies itself as a technology company and not a transport company, it can and most of the time does skirt the rules and regulations, which allows it to be able to undercut the taxi industry. When they move into a new market, the first thing that they prioritize is launching and just like rapidly expanding, like racking up as much of a customer base as possible, and then they later go on to negotiate such trivial things as laws and regulations and such. Where have I heard this before? Where have I heard this before? South African Parliament, maybe. Anyways, Uber also has a really dynamic pricing model, allowing them to raise and lower prices according to demand, which allows them to maximize on profitability. These disruptive strategies have caused a lot of conflicts between the company and the taxi industries in cities all over the world. In June 2015, 3,000 Paris taxi drivers has took to the streets to protest Uber after the company had come in and undercut them on pricing. Taxi drivers would do stuff like block roads, attack Uber drivers, burn cars and tires, all because Uber allowed their drivers to operate and transport people within Paris without their drivers having a specialized chauffeur license, something that costs around $270,000 in France. Such pushback wasn't exclusive to France alone though. In Spain, there were 3 months of cars being burned and drivers being assaulted. The same rang true in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and right here in South Africa, with Uber drivers being assaulted and even murdered just because of the company's very aggressive expansion tactics. Uber officially entered the South African market in 2013, operating in your major metros like your Port Elizabeth, your East London, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, such areas. We were still a bit hesitant back then to adopt it just because of how much of a new and unknown concept e-hailing was. But the convenience, transparent pricing, and ease of use made the platform popular amongst middle-class South African individuals who before had to rely on the just very inconvenient taxi system or our non-existent public transport system. Uber was followed by the launch of Bolt in 2016, which kind of positioned itself as a cheaper alternative to Uber and would take less commission from drivers as well. And since the launch of Bolt, South Africans have kind of widely and very quickly adopted e-hailing as just a part of our daily lives. It's now a normal part of how we get around, just because of how convenient, relatively reliable, relatively reliable, and moderately inexpensive. Once again, moderately inexpensive. You know, Uber and Bolt are really reliable until the nice 2-meter tall muscular Nigerian man who was your driver and who you had just spent the last 20 minutes conversating with casually takes a off-ramp a bit too soon into an area you're not familiar with. Then it starts being a bit less reliable, but otherwise otherwise you should be fine. By 2023, South Africans had taken over 400 million Bolt rides, and and Uber had contributed over 17 billion rands to the South African economy. I mean, there's no questioning it. E-hailing has become just a fundamental part of how we move around as South Africans, especially in our major metros. But as you would have guessed, this expansion and this rapid growth in this sector didn't happen in a vacuum. Because with every new technology that shakes the status quo, there's always someone who stands to lose. As most of you will know if you are a fan of this channel, the South African taxi industry has its roots in apartheid South Africa, when a majority of black people had to live in townships because of, well, apartheid, and they had to commute from these townships into the centers of commerce that they worked in on a daily basis. Taxis back then operated by exploiting a loophole in the Road Transportation Act of 1977, which defined a bus as a vehicle that carried more than 9 individuals, including the driver. Black entrepreneurs and opportunists alike realized that as long as they restricted the number of passengers that they were carrying to less than 9, they could exploit this loophole to transport people and not have to comply to the very strict rules and regulations that a normal bus would have to comply with. They were still largely operating illegally, don't get me wrong, but this loophole allowed for the emergence of one of the most powerful industries in the history of South Africa. Today, minibus taxis account for approximately 15 million commuters daily, contributing to 65% of all public transport commuting in South Africa. The annual turnover of this industry is approximated to be around 50 to 100 billion rands, but these are very rough approximations just because of how unregulated this industry is. 100 billion rands, what's that? Like, 2000 USD. It's economy. Minibus taxis have kind of become the only form of public transportation in this country, or affordable public transportation in this country, employing approximately 600,000 people. So with how powerful, dominant, and just politically significant the taxi industry is in this country, you kind of think that the introduction of the e-hailing sector would kind of be like a small drop in the vast ocean that is our public transport sector. But oh boy, would you be wrong. A few months ago, 27-year-old Mthokozi Simvelase was shot and killed in his vehicle outside of Maponya Mall in Soweto, Gauteng. His car would subsequently be set on fire in a just ruthless display of unnecessarily gruesome violence that resulted in a community protest against minibus taxis. Around the same time, an e-hailing driver would be shot and another wounded in Durban, in yet another display of just violence. And these are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the amount of violence that e-hailing drivers have been exposed to since the launch and wide adoption of this concept in the 2010s. It has been reported that there has been a 20% jump in e-hailing crimes such as hijackings and assaults from 2023 to 2024 in Gauteng, KZN and the Western Cape. And a 2024-25 study found that 72% of e-hailing drivers operating in Johannesburg reported being threatened by taxi bus operators. But why would such a huge industry be so violent towards a very small subsection that just doesn't compare in terms of numbers? It's just not comparing in terms of customer base. Well, the answer to that question is actually quite complicated. South African taxi operators have always controlled specific routes and zones, and e-hailing drivers simply just don't comply with these rules, which really kind of frustrates the traditional taxi industry. Which, you know, you could see how that could potentially become a problem. I mean, if you look at it from a micro scale, from a micro point of view, e-hailing drivers invading these boundaries and encroaching on taxi operators' routes is perceived as them stealing customers from taxis and hindering their income. Now, once you zoom out from the micro into the macro, this doesn't make much sense considering how much just larger the taxi industry is. Well, doesn't make sense to me at least. But I could see how if, for example, you owned a taxi and you had been operating a specific route, let's say for years now, and you kind of know what to expect from that route on a daily or weekly basis. But now you have all of these new e-hailing drivers driving the same routes. Maybe you see a bit of a dip in your income. I could see how that could become a bit of a problem. I mean, if you're a taxi driver, every single customer and every single cent matters, especially considering just how little you're earning in the first place. You have to, no matter what, hit your check-in amount on a daily or weekly basis, depending on what your agreement is. So when you have e-hailing drivers cutting into your income, I think we can see how that can become a very significant problem very quickly. And while taxis have to adhere to a lot of regulatory standards, e-hailing drivers and vehicles don't have to go through the same red tape, which is kind of perceived as being unfair and, you know, kind of breaking the rules in a way. At the end of the day, no matter how small the slice may be, the e-hailing industry is still taking a slice out of the massive public transportation market, something that the established powers that be will not tolerate at all, as we've seen in the past few years. And even if we look outside of the danger that e-hailing drivers face from taxi operators, this business on its own is generally just really dangerous and very difficult in this country. Criminals will request rides and either rob the driver of their phone, their money, or any kind of other possession that's in the car, or they'll just take the car itself. It's also really difficult to make a living on platforms like Uber and Bolt just because of the sheer number of drivers that are on these platforms nowadays. Drivers who get into e-hailing expecting quick money are trapped working 12-hour days just to scrape by while simultaneously risking their lives on a daily basis. And because of South Africa's frankly non-existent job market, I mean, that's the reason I'm filming YouTube videos right now. Don't have a job, I'm very unemployed. These guys are often left with no other choice but to get exploited by these platforms. The lack of regulation in this industry also means that drivers have minimum labor law protection, which is perfect for these companies to just extract as much value and as much commission out of these drivers as possible. And this lack of regulation also means that drivers just have very little power to change anything. I mean, these companies hold all of the bargaining chips. They have the platform and they have the power to replace drivers just as soon as one leaves. So then, can this issue be fixed, or do I think this issue can be fixed? Yes, I do think it can be fixed, but it would need to be a fix that comes from the top down, not from the bottom up. It would have to do a lot with just regulation. If we were to be able to regulate the taxi industry and the e-hailing industry simultaneously, I think we would solve a lot of the issues happening with both these industries at the moment. I mean, not only are Uber drivers exploited for their commission and they have no choice because they have no other way of providing for their families, taxi drivers have been getting exploited for years now in South Africa. And I think a majority of us know this. Taxi drivers earn next to nothing on a monthly basis, but just because of the job market in South Africa, there's no other alternative out there, you know. So I think regulating the taxi industry as well as the e-hailing industry could be something that's very beneficial, not only for the passengers but also for the drivers as well. For the passengers, it's beneficial because it means that you are safer. Probably means there's no space for you to get exploited in any kind of way, and it's generally just better for customers. Regulation for drivers means that they actually get to earn minimum wage and actually make a good living and not have all of their money go to their bosses, and have legitimate structured working hours like other employed South Africans out there. While we're regulating these industries, let's also bake in labor law in there to protect these people so that they are not just like turned out as much. Because as soon as a taxi driver doesn't hit the check-in, or as soon as they feel like they're getting exploited, the bosses don't negotiate, they throw you out. And similarly, as soon as an Uber driver feels like they're frustrated with the platform and they leave, Uber doesn't care, they just get another driver. You know what I'm saying? So if we have actual labor laws that protect these drivers, we have stuff like unions that fight for these drivers' rights, I think that would also be a good step in the right direction. Also to just increase the amount of violence that's happening if people have more of a voice to express their grievances, actually be listened to, and have their grievances turned into actual changes in the industry itself. I think that could foster an environment where there's just way less infighting in both these industries. And the next step to fixing the issue after regulation is mediating the two, because even after regulation there could still potentially be beefs between these two elements. But the way to fix that is to just combine the two. Now that they're both equally regulated, you can have taxi drivers sign up for services like Uber so that, you know, they perceive things as being a bit more fair. They have the same access to the same clientele and they can choose whether or not they want to serve it or not. Just combine the two after regulating them, and I think it should be fine. I don't know, man. I'm 20 years old. I'm just saying potential solutions here. But in terms of the e-hailing industry, something that could be more immediately done to improve the e-hailing industry, the first thing would be just going back to card transactions. I feel like I haven't researched this. I am kind of just like talking out of my head here, but I feel like e-hailing was a bit safer when it was just card only. Now that drivers are carrying cash, there's a lot more incentive for criminals to book rides for the sole purpose of robbing them, just because they know that they have money on them. And there's just way more opportunity for people to scam drivers and not pay them for rides. So let's just go back to card only transactions. That's probably never gonna happen, just because that's less profitable for these big corporations that are in charge of these platforms, but that could also be a potential solution. Profit sharing could also be improved with these two platforms. Man, these commissions are killing drivers. People are unable to make a living, man. Just give people more of their money. They're making the money. Give them the money. You know, capitalism doesn't work like that, unfortunately, but that could be a potential way just to make things a bit easier on e-hailing drivers. And my final point is just use AI, man. All these corporations are yapping about AI and how great it is. Use AI to make the lives of drivers easier and safer on a daily basis. Use AI to predict high-risk areas depending on like the time of the day, you know, so that new drivers who are maybe not familiar with an area don't put themselves in unnecessary amounts of danger because of naivety, because of a lack of knowledge. Use AI to make people's lives better, to make people's lives safer, so that they can continue making you more money, because that's the ultimate goal with any corporation. But that is enough yap. That is what I think could be done to fix this entire industry. And that is it for the video about e-hailing in South Africa. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and I look forward to reading what you have to say in the comment section down below. I have also like just dropped a hour-long vlog of everything that happened last week in the business that is available for members of the channel. So make sure you click that join button if you want to go back to watching the vlogs. Also make sure you go check out julukaworx.co.za, because like I said, you checking them out might result in you having work, having a job. So make sure you give them some love as well. And yeah, thank you very, very much for watching. I truly mean it. You guys are amazing. And until the next one, goodbye.